Air Force. Purpose. I mean, I'd assume kind of being that, being like the ones who actually do the traveling, kind of do the flying, spying, I don't know.
Okay.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd say the Marines is the section of the military. If there's conflict somewhere the U.S. is deciding involved in, they're probably the first ones to go in.
Marines are like the audition military. Oh my god, I sound like a theater kid. But like you have to like, it's like more like, I don't know, not exclusive. Okay, yeah, you have to like try out. It's like harder to get into, and they're just So I think they have like a presence and
kind of a prestige about them.
I think the Air Force, whenever we're in a fight, they fly the planes and they're in charge of like the air combat, and maybe they shoot down.
And last question, where does your knowledge about the military come from? News, movies, friends, family?
I'd say all of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim? Yeah. And where does your knowledge about the military come from?
News.
Websites, whatever.
Okay.
Just
Government, the class.
Government class?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like friends.
Friends?
Who, like my parent, like my friend's parents, just like what she's told me about her dad, and also like a little bit of U.S. history class. But yeah, and TV, like the news.
Okay, so school and what you see on screen.
Yeah.
all right.
Well,
Hey,
that's
thank
all.
you so much.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate
Do I
it.
sound like one of those kids who are? So where's North Korea? Point to Europe. Do I sound like one of those?
No, you sound very well.
So everyone we talked to had different backgrounds and different points of view, but it did seem like there were some commonalities in their answers. Nick, what would you say you took away from the students' answers about why people join the military?
Well, first, they all had a pretty uniform perception of who joins the military. It's an archetype of someone who's patriotic, but has few opportunities in life. In their eyes, people who join the military are usually low or middle income, and they need better economic options. Some students talked about the young men who join the military, so it sounded like there was an assumption that most people who join the service are guys.
It didn't really seem like very many people knew anyone in the military either.
Right, many students we talked to didn't know anybody currently in the military. A few knew a veteran, a few had relatives serve, 2 students had a high school classmate attend West Point, but many of them didn't personally know anybody who was actively serving.
And what would you say about the students' answers to some of your knowledge-based questions about the military and military policy?
Well, to that, there's a tremendous lack of knowledge out there about what the military does. People had a hard time discerning the different purposes and mission sets of the 5 branches. They didn't know which parts of government set different aspects of military policy, and they were unsure of the military's relationship to the president and to the Constitution. When we asked them where they got their knowledge about the military, only 1 or 2 of them said they'd ever learned about it in school.
So, a really interesting side note. UChicago has a large population of international students, and we talked to 2 students from China during these interviews. Both of them gave the same response to one of our questions.
Does the military serve the president or the U.S. Constitution?
Well, I only know I think the Marine only serves the president, and the other troops are like I need to listen to the Congress, or
Okay.
like the Constitution, I guess.
And does the U.S. military serve the president or the Constitution or both?
Marines serve the presidents. U.S. military serves the Constitution or the nation.
Okay. We're really curious about this, and unfortunately we let our interviewees get away before we made the connection. So if any of our listeners out there have any idea why these students answered this way, please let us know.
Obviously, as Corey Shockey told us in our very first podcast interview,
the plural of anecdote is not data.
The group of students we talked to was definitely not representative of American society in general. But these brief conversations with students did give us an interesting ground-level look at civil-military relations here in Hyde Park, especially in the minds of people our age. We'll try to bring you more of these discussions in future episodes.
For the rest of the episode, we'll be focusing on reasons for why people join the military. Part 2 of this topic will cover military demographics. As we began planning these episodes, we knew exactly who to call.
I'm Emma Moore. I work as a research associate for Center for New American Security. My specific interests are military recruitment, that relationship that the military has with society from a consumption standpoint, where people learn about the military, as well as women in integration and physical fitness, to see what we mean by lethality and readiness.
Emma is one of the civil military relations scholars that Nick and I really look up to. She helped us quite a bit with some of our interview prep last season, especially for our episode on Hollywood and media stereotypes about the military.
Emma explained to us the realities of enlistment and recruiting. For one, she pointed out how the stereotype of military recruitment exclusively coming from low-income populations doesn't actually measure up to reality.
We've seen a lot of these misconceptions play out, and my boss, Kayla Williams, did a great rundown and has tested this in different settings, saying what are the national security assumptions about military service, even as they people who are working with the military kind of day in and day out, and on policy issues that affect the military. The low income as a reason to join the military is not always seen to play out in practice, and partially it's because of military standards. There are correlations between education attainment and being lower income. So because you have to have a high school degree in order to join the military, that actually means that sometimes lower income individuals do not have a qualification. So we see lower representation in the military amongst the lowest and the highest quintile of socioeconomic status, and the biggest representation in the middle third.
Emma highlighted the reasons for enlisting that are better backed by empirical data.
I think as a nation, we would like people to join because they have a sense of, they have this selfless service, or they have a desire to serve the nation. But turns out the real things that people actually need to think about, like money for college, having a meaningful career, but also having opportunity, are really the big reasons. So paying for future education is like one of the biggest reasons people say they would be interested in serving in the military. And yet there's this desire, I think, not to advertise that, because it seems like military marketing doesn't want to be transactional about why people are joining, but clearly that's a priority for everyone. Travel and good compensation are other reasons people join. RAND has put out some research on why people join. There's a difference between people who have elected into combat arms, and that's shown that they find excitement and a different kind of experience in those jobs than they might in any other career. But there's a different sector of people who might have gone into combat support who say, I'm going to be a mechanic because this is transferable skills and I'll be able to be employed afterwards. So I don't think it's wrong to say serve your country, find glory perhaps, but that's not the only narrative to hit.
As Emma pointed out, because of those educational requirements, the majority of people joining the military do not come from low-income backgrounds. But once people do join, the military can be a gateway to pursuing higher education and job opportunities.
And the military is taking note of this. Increasingly, recruiting efforts are focused on highlighting the future job opportunities that the military offers.
The best ads I've seen have been really trying to address influencers who aren't necessarily service personnel themselves. And that's, there's a good one I think the Navy put out a year or so ago, and again recently, of, a young woman saying, I want to do cyber in the military because I find that it's the most fulfilling, it's the most interesting. I'm dealing with real world threats every day. And that was directly to speak to mothers, for example. I think the military has fallen short in the Army in particular, on relying on combat arms images and rhetoric as a recruitment method. Those are people who are already interested and have propensity to serve and don't necessarily need to be convinced to get across the finish line. It's really that kind of middle area of people who might have thought about it but might not be willing to take the step that need to be addressed more directly. I think definitely the military should be focusing on jobs that it doesn't primarily highlight as military jobs. The fact that you can be a veterinarian, you can be, a mechanic, you can be a public affairs officer, psychological operations. These are all things that are harder to communicate, and the ones where you want maybe more highly skilled people in the door. And so saying that random college student over here, or somebody who's in community college that might be interested in journalism, that you can have a full-time job in the military with great benefits, and that might be a harder market to crack on the civilian side. Same with things like the band. It's hard to be employed as a trumpeter, for example, but you can do that full-time in the military.
Emma's expert advice helps dispel some of the traditional stereotypical thinking on why people decide to join the military. But we wanted to go beyond the data to get a more personal look.
That's why we reached out to an incoming freshman here at the University of Chicago who happens to be a 10-year Navy veteran, Kaedy Puckett.
So I joined the Navy in 2009 when I was 25 years old, and I ended up becoming a cryptologic linguist. My language was Arabic, which was a really interesting thing that I never expected I would learn ever at any point in my life. I also became aircrew, so I flew on missions all over the world. I deployed to Afghanistan, and I did a lot of deployments in the Mediterranean as well. After that, I did a tour at Great Lakes Naval Base, where I worked with young sailors as an instructor, teaching them about life skills.
We tried to get her to talk more about her deployments, but a lot of what she did was classified.
Well,
were you processing in air, or
we use a lot of equipment, communications equipment.
Sure. Okay.
And we just do various tasks using that equipment while on an aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Got it.
But she could share other parts of her story, like her reasons for joining.
So I went to Auburn University because I grew up in the South, and in the South, it's not a lot of people like, hey, you should go to Harvard or Princeton. They're like, hey, which SEC school are you going to? Or you can go to Alabama, you can go to Auburn, or how about Georgia? Join a sorority, meet your husband at a frat party, that kind of thing. And that just really wasn't my path. I kind of knew that going into it, but I did what any good girl from Alabama does, and I went off to Auburn after my senior year of high school. When I got there, I did okay my first year, played some lacrosse. Then I started partying a little bit too hard. And just kind of lost sight of what I wanted, what I was doing. So I ended up leaving school and moved back to Huntsville, Alabama with my family. So my dad ended up serving for 30 years. It was 10 active and 20 reserve. And he retired as a captain. He worked in the intel community as an intelligence officer, did a lot of cool stuff. And he always spoke very highly of his time in the Navy. He loved his shipmates. They had all these hilarious stories. I think my godfather was one of his best buddies that they served as young surface warfare officers together early in their career. But he loved it. And after he retired, I know he kind of always wanted one of his kids to go into the service, but neither of my brothers did, and kind of ended up on me after those, poor life choices I had made.
She also discussed the recruitment process.
And I was actually a recruiter's dream. I basically just walked in and said, sign me up, which obviously they didn't have to do much work, which was great for them. How that normally works, though, is they'll go to high schools. They'll make visits to community colleges. They'll get out at various events in the community, the recruiters who are at the local recruiting stations, and they'll try to get kids interested. Hey, have you considered service as opposed to college? Or, hey, we can get you through college if you want to serve. So my dad had always spoken very highly of his times in the Navy with his shipmates and all the places he traveled. He had incredible stories. Made some of the best friends of his life. So I kind of had that sort of optimistic outlook going into it. I knew I would make friends and travel, and it would be an adventure. However, on the other side of things, I don't think I really had formed a comprehensive picture of what day-to-day life in the military would be like. I vaguely understood that there would be a lot of physical training. I might learn some new skills, and I might travel the world, but I wasn't really sure of what that would look like through the lens of an everyday experience. So I didn't really have too many expectations, just really that this is a good opportunity for me to get out of the rut I'm in.
Initially, Kaedy wanted to join the intelligence community in the Navy, but she ended up becoming a cryptologic technician and training as a linguist instead.
Yeah, so when you join the Navy as an enlisted person, you have this ASVAB, right? The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. And it's basically like kind of almost like an SAT test, but a little easier, I think. And it shows what kind of aptitude you'd have for, say, like mechanical or verbal or you get what I'm saying, like electrical. And